Open fire!
The National Guard 3rd Brigade of Operational Assignment Spartan earned its name due to the extraordinary resilience of its servicemen. They repelled the attack of Russian forces in the first hours of the battles on the outskirts of Kharkiv, where Russians pushed their columns in the early morning of February 24, 2022. They planned to swiftly enter the city with a large number of units and vehicles, but failed to achieve this goal. Instead of the expected triumph, they encountered harsh resistance. The Ukrainian Defence Forces initiated a long-lasting heroic operation through incredible common efforts threw the enemy out of the Kharkiv region. From the very first day of the full-scale invasion, soldiers of the 3rd National Guard Brigade proved they had spent hours at training grounds for this purpose. Columns of destroyed and burned Russian vehicles quickly began to accumulate on the outskirts of Kharkiv. On the roads, in the forest belts, in the fields, and in the trenches, there were dozens of frozen enemy bodies.
From the first day of the war, the 3rd Brigade has been actively engaged in missions in safeguarding the city of Kharkiv. I can't say it was entirely unexpected, since the brigade had been given instructions beforehand regarding defensive positions we were expected to secure. Therefore, since the beginning of the war, the brigade deployed battalion by battalion to the designated boundaries for defensive operations. In the early days, alongside the 92nd Brigade, we fulfilled assignments aimed at preventing the enemy from reaching the city of Kharkiv. We had made preparations for this scenario, thus the enemy's intended objectives of capturing the intersection were considered. We had the coordinates, and with the assistance of Eastern Command's OZSP, who directed the fire, precise hits were made on tanks and APCs, effectively stopping the enemy.
Our conscripts were captured on the first day, while the 92nd Brigade was withdrawing. We lacked communication capabilities at that time. Being both the National Guard and the armed forces, we set up communication with the rest of the armed forces in the initial days. And from then on, we continued to stand shoulder to shoulder, covering each other's backs. We had designated checkpoints along the Ring Road, starting from the Rozovitriv restaurant, which is the gateway to Stary Saltiv, and all the way to Cherkaska Lozova. Pyatikhatki is also under our control. Our brigade was assigned to hold all these front lines. On the first day, we engaged in combat and then held our defensive positions. Over time, we gradually began to push them back. It was truly challenging. Afterwards, we took on the responsibility on defending Zolochivsky district and Derhachivsky district. Defending this entire territory was solely our duty.
Russian invaders advanced in long columns that stretched for miles. They strived to implement the doctrine of the so-called Grand Breakthrough. At the beginning, the Russians succeeded in swiftly seizing areas in the north, east and south of the Kharkiv region. However, all attempts to enter Kharkiv itself ended in consecutive failures.
During the attack on Kharkiv and enemy's efforts to breach our positions, I stood my ground with my armored vehicle driver and 4 conscripted soldiers. My father was also present at the position. He covered our group, allowing us to infiltrate the enemy's rear and fight back. Later on, I learned that my father had perished while breaking through the enemy encirclement. However, we set their equipment ablaze on that day. 1 MTLB, 2 Grad launchers and resupply vehicle carrying ammunition.
There were 30 of us, and they were marching in 2 columns. The first column didn't make it, but we encountered the second one here, neutralized them and took the first captive at that moment. This route leads directly to Belgorod. We understood that if they didn't go through this road, they would take the next one. We were waiting for them at the intersection. Their objective was to drive into the city and go as far as they could. The captive told us that they were heading to the city center.
Even the National Guard conscripts were an unpleasant surprise to the Russian forces. Together with their commanding officers, they resisted the enemy's initial assaults and entered the fight while the mobilized units were underway to be fully manned. These brave young men fearlessly and valiantly carried out their tasks in the most intense combat zones of the Kharkiv region.
Conscripts demonstrated such positive qualities during the defense of Kharkiv that I would say some of them were cut above the military personnel. Professionalism and expertise were gained through actual combat. Upon entering Kharkiv from Stary Saltiv, checkpoints were established right before the onset of the invasion, as we received information from various sources indicating probably, and we were already getting ready for this probability. And when soldiers were already stationed at the checkpoints, our vehicles were coming from the direction of the Russian border. The servicemen let them pass, thinking that they were our forces, but those were actually captured vehicles with Russian military personnel. The servicemen thought that they were our forces, retreating to other positions. Turned out it was Russian military on our vehicles. That's how our soldiers ended up being taken captive on the very first day of the war, February 24th. It has happened around midday, so various situations occurred with the conscripts. However, they were freed by the 92nd Brigade. They came back, they were so thrilled. You know, they came back so dirty, words cannot describe it. We immediately took them to the showers, issued them the new uniform because the previous ones were torn, military IDs were burned, weapons were taken away. While the 92nd Brigade was rescuing them, the conscripts themselves disarmed Russians and took some captives. As soon as we restored their appearance, they started asking to send them back to the fight. There was no fear or reluctance from them saying we won't go. On the contrary, they said send us back there. Alright then, we, along with the platoon commander, headed to the same checkpoint with them. They had an unbreakable motivation. Yes, it wasn't easy for everyone in the first few days, but we stayed resilient. What mattered was that the officers showed no fear, they explained the importance of the staying strong, and the personnel began to follow their lead. Officers, platoon leaders and company commanders were all on the front lines. There was no case where a commander was isolated from their unit. For instance, a conscripted soldier who joined the military in 2020 and was supposed to be discharged in the spring of 2022 remains in service due to the onset of the war. This type of conscripted soldiers on average is 24-25 years old. There were also individuals who were mobilized at the age of 19 and had no prior military service experience. People often think that mobilized individuals are older and that's why have experienced knowledge. But there were cases where mobilized individuals were younger than conscripted soldiers. Mobilized personnel, career soldiers and conscripts. And we have great respect to the conscript soldiers in our brigade. At 7:30 in the morning of February 24th, the conscript soldiers of the Howitzer division successfully shattered a column of Russian tanks at the entrance to Kharkiv. Conscripts. It was conscript soldiers who shot down the first enemy airplane, a Su-24. Conscripts units as well. One shot down the airplane and shortly after another conscript soldier captured a Russian lieutenant colonel.
Guardsmen effectively halted the pace of Russian aviation in the airspace over Kharkiv. Due to the successful downing of 2 enemy jets by Perun and Igla manpads, the enemy quickly realized that from now on, the actions of aviation using high-explosive aerial bombs over the city center end up with aircraft wreckage, and in the best scenario, the pilots would be able to save themselves through ejection.
Shortly after repositioning around 6 p.m., we were immediately alerted about an incoming aerial target. Quickly equipping ourselves, we connected a thermal sight with Polish-made Perun manpads. Having a clear view of the target, I immediately reported it to my superior. I launched a missile and it hit the target.
Our unit successfully destroyed the first target, which was an enemy Su-34 engaged in bombing our city of Kharkiv. In March, our unit successfully eliminated the designated enemy target with a simultaneous double launch. 2 crews handled the situation effectively. The remaining aircrafts, which were also accompanied by them, were targeted by our anti-aircraft guns, but unfortunately were not hit. Therefore, the initial target was the Su-34. Firstly, it significantly boosted the morale of the entire personnel. We witnessed that it was possible to shoot down any aircraft, regardless of its class, using portable anti-aircraft missile systems. Secondly, it fostered confidence in everyone, that anyone could do it. This is because one of the individuals involved was a mobilized soldier, and the other was a conscripted serviceman. This gave us confidence that we have strength to repel enemy's air attacks. Guys were waiting for it, knowing the approximate direction of its movement. And I want to say that after they shut down this aircraft, the bombardment of the city by enemy aviation completely ceased, because they realized the strength of our air defense system, which was in place. We effectively safeguarded the city from the future enemy's airstrikes.
The tremendous influx of Kharkiv residents who rallied to defend their city during the mobilization had a significant impact on the formation of the striking power of the 3rd Operational Brigade. Among them were many individuals with combat experience.
As of February 24, I served as the deputy commander and chief of staff of the battalion. Since the early hours of the war, the contingent of conscripts and mobilized military personnel advanced to the ring road and assumed defensive positions where we held our ground until May. Following that, there were intense battlegrounds: Brudyanka, Kutuzivka, Shapovalivka. Heavy fighting persisted there until September. We had tanks at our disposal, including T-64 and T-72, 120mm mortars, and were extensively using UAVs. In August, enemy forces began to retreat, allowing us to advance towards the border with the Russian Federation.
By the end of March 2022, the pressure of Russian invaders around Kharkiv was getting exhausted. Despite the advantages of Russian forces in artillery, armored vehicles, aviation and manpower, the Ukrainians managed to tie the enemy's hands with a steadfast defense. They turned entries to the city, forest belts and heights into fortresses. The enemy was forced to entrench themselves, but attempted to break the spirits of the fighters and the people of Kharkiv through constant shelling of residential areas. Russian multiple rocket launchers, artillery and mortars operated non-stop. The invaders employed heavy flame-throwing systems, phosphorus ammunition, and remote mining systems in the outskirts of the city and military positions. Nevertheless, the enemy forces, much to their surprise, were unable to effectively respond to the coordinated assault operations carried out by small Ukrainian infantry units, bolstered by highly motivated volunteers. Our soldiers made a swift breakthrough in Mala Rohan, Kutuzivka, and unblocked the Tsyrkuny highway. Soldiers of the 3rd Brigade, supported by elite Omega Special Operations Unit and the 5th Slobozhans'k Brigade, played a pivotal role in this and numerous similar operations. They also demonstrated perseverance in maintaining their newly gained positions. Such developments drastically changed the situation in the industrial district of Kharkiv, Rohan and Tsyrkuny, which appeared to be on the brink of seizing. Thus began an incredibly challenging liberation campaign of Slobozhans'k region, which remains ongoing.
In the night, we arrived at Molochka, where we evacuated the first badly wounded in action. Several more shells with phosphorus flew in. I had never heard or seen anything like it before. The explosions were extremely loud. We dug out a Bogdan medical evacuation vehicle. We loaded wounded in action who were heavily wounded, including shell-shocked, and those affected by phosphorus, and evacuated them to a secure zone.
In May, Ukrainian Defence Forces began pushing the enemy back in the northern part of Kharkiv region. As a result of the assault operations conducted by Guardsmen, armed forces and the special unit Kraken, Ruська-Лозова was liberated. Fighters of the 3rd Brigade of the National Guard held their new positions and engaged in heavy combat for Dementiivka.
3 days before the full-scale invasion, we gathered as the Association of ATO Veterans. The gathering included local residents, farmers and entrepreneurs who collectively decided to form a partisan unit. The 93rd Холодный Yar Brigade and the 92nd Brigade of the Armed Forces were stationed here, providing security for our community for 50 days before being relocated. Military Unit 3017 of the National Guard Forces has arrived to replace them. Guardsmen took control of our community, the territory from Ruська-Лозова to the settlement of Udy within Zolochiv territorial community. They held a stretch of about 50 kilometers, likely along the state border facing the enemy. In the first few days we were introduced to the battalion commander. His name was Dmytro Sherbina. We developed a working relationship with him and cooperated in sharing information. Being locals, we knew many people in the captured territories. We had established contacts with agents who kept us informed about the movements of Russian military, equipment and the whereabouts of personnel. We shared this information with the National Guard, enabling them to make accurate assessments of the current situation and effectively eliminate the enemy.
In early May 2022, a joint operation was conducted in the town of Ruська-Лозова with the National Guard, especially its 3rd Brigade. Combat mission was successfully executed. While carrying out the mission, I witnessed the determination in the eyes of these young men. I saw firsthand how they worked, guarding the borders and preventing the enemy from entering the town. As we arrived at the location where the guys were based, the scene was intense. Tank shells were raining down, caliber missiles streaked across the sky. Emotions ran high, but the guys carried out their work calmly, with precision and coordination. There were no signs of panic, I must say. We advanced to the secret checkpoint, communication was established, mission was accomplished, and we all returned without any losses.
We were in Ruська-Лозова, a town in Kharkiv region. There, my unit and I, together with Kraken, conducted stabilization measures. It went well. The settlement was liberated. Next important mission was Dementiivka. Defending Dementiivka, my platoon suffered some casualties. However, the task set by High Command was accomplished. At that time, I was serving as a driver, and my main responsibility was the evacuation of the wounded from the combat zone. In one day, I managed to evacuate 17 wounded, and fortunately, all of them survived.
From April to August, Russians continued to shell most residential areas of Kharkiv with artillery and multiple rocket launchers. Shelling was conducted from Tsyrkuny and Kozachya Lopань. Front line was highly dynamic, with certain Ukrainian units managing to break through almost to the state border only to later pull back. Some towns and villages changed hands repeatedly. Nonetheless, the fighters of Spartan managed to maintain their observation posts and steadily expand area of firepower. Meanwhile, the Howitzer Artillery Division, equipped with new high-precision cannons, softened the enemy's defense, conducted aerial reconnaissance and provided fire support for neighboring units of the armed forces of Ukraine. It lasted until mid-August 2022, when the Ukrainian Defence Forces accomplished a breakthrough. Troops of the 3rd Brigade successfully liberated Tsyrkuny, Kozachya Lopань and Udy. In some areas, our positions were as close as 300 meters from the state border. Retreating enemy forces abandoned a significant amount of equipment, ammunition and weaponry for the Guardsmen.
When we entered, we saw a lot of frightened civilians. The locals were overjoyed that the settlement had been liberated from Russians. We held Brudyanka for 3 months prior to this. We had numerous firefights with the enemy, engaging in intense gun battles and artillery duels. Afterwards, we launched an offensive operation. In just 2 days, we liberated the settlements of Tsyrkuny, Tokarivka and Nova Kozachya. We have now secured our positions in the area of Kozachya Lopань.
I remember how our crew drove into Brudyanka. Then the vehicle came under fire. We managed to drive under the arch, although we were slightly stunned. We made it out alive. During the summer there were also firefights. One time the battle with enemy sabotage and reconnaissance group lasted the entire night. The toughest moment for me is when I was evacuating my severely wounded comrade.
What kind of injury did he have?
It's shrapnel injury.
Injury to the arms or legs?
His lungs were punctured by shrapnel.
Oh, I see. How did you make your way to Kozachya Lopань during the offensive?
We held the front line in this sector in the Brudyanka area. We received information that the enemy was pulling back their forces. Although things were uncertain at first, there was a sense of joy in our hearts that we were moving forward and liberating our land.
Behind me, there was a surveillance post of the Russian armed forces, coordinated artillery strikes on our positions, which were located roughly a kilometer away from me. There was a road leading to our positions. Russians were directing artillery fire from that observation point. In mid-September, I cannot recall the exact date, but it's associated with the fact that Special Operation Unit of GUR, in collaboration with our brigade, blew up the tower, thereby preventing them from adjusting artillery fire. Of course, Tsyrkuny served as the direct road through Brudyanka leading to Kharkiv, and it was where a majority of the troops were stationed, including in Kozachya Lopань. I can tell you that they left behind a large amount of weaponry here, perhaps 80% of their arsenal, and we took it for ourselves. They were fleeing in haste, probably feeling the power of the Ukrainian army. GUR Special Force Unit, along with our mortar battery, planted explosives here. It was no simple feat. They fought their way through and detonated the tower. Afterwards, they retreated to our position situated on the hill. One of the combat missions was to advance directly to the state border in the Belgorod direction. The objective was Khoptivka border crossing post near Khoptivka. We had to pass through a fully mined section of the Belgorod highway with the National Guard soldiers. There were approximately 300 anti-tank mines there, and we couldn't afford any mistakes. We had to reach the target and accomplish the mission. Luckily, we successfully accomplished it together, returned without casualties, and frankly speaking, we're very glad.
Meanwhile, some units of the 3rd Brigade of the National Guard moved eastward to Kupiansk. Together with other units of the Ukrainian Defence Forces, they expelled the enemy from there and started consolidating their positions in Novoselivsk area along the Svatove direction.
Experiencing rockets falling overhead and aviation bombs was an entirely new experience. The closest encounter was in Novoselivka, with gunfire exchanged at a distance of 15 meters. I took out 2 of them as soon as I stepped out from behind the house. The combat took place at extremely short distances, approximately 30 to 50 meters, and at times a tank would appear and open fire from a range of 150 meters. The relentless artillery bombardment was like a mini Stalingrad, with ruins appearing all around you, running through the debris, enemies rushing towards you. It all leads to brutal short-range battles where no one begged for mercy. Speaking of my personal experience, I have been involved in battles at the key locations of our 3rd Battalion, such as Ring Road, Ruсь-Kolozova, Dementiivka, Udy, Novoselivka, Kivsharivka. Situation in Dementiivka was intense, but when compared to what unfolded later, it was a whole new level of warfare. However, I must admit that during battles for Dementiivka, we didn't have the same level of artillery support. We could not respond to enemy shelling due to a shortage of ammunition. Oppositely, despite the relentless enemy pressure during the offensive in Novoselivka, we consistently had adequate and comparable forces to counter their efforts. Sure thing, we didn't launch lamppost-sized rockets as they did, but in the meantime our aviation responded to their airstrikes accordingly. Our tanks and IFVs arrived to support our defenders in the village, and with that parity in heavy equipment, defeating the Russians became significantly easier, like a piece of cake.
Please, just don't leave us, we're out of strength.
Did you have problems with electricity and water supply?
There is no electricity, no gas, no water. We had to take water from wells. There was a lack of food supplies, and we survived as best we could. Just don't leave us, everything is in ruins, nothing is left intact.
What's your name?
Nadia,
Nadia, everything will be fine.
please, just don't leave us, guys. I can't take it anymore.
From now, everything gonna be alright. Is this a school? A kindergarten?
No, the kindergarten is a bit further. This is the enterprise office building. They used to live here.
Russians lived here?
Yeah, they did. And they housed all of us in the basement of the kindergarten. Everything is in ruins.
So you lived in the basement for 40 days?
It's 60. 60 days we are living in the basement.
63 actually.
It's hours.
We lived here all together.
It was just a short while ago. We engaged in combat, taking down 30 enemies. Just like this. We gave them hell. They numbered 30, while we were only 8. We held our positions as they attempted to outflank us, but they failed to do so. My comrade in arms, codenamed Kaban, provided cover for me and got injured himself. Shrapnel wounded his face. Despite being wounded, he continued fighting for 3 hours, and then even helped evacuate other wounded soldiers. Overall, they also dig in, but everyone has their own tactics. Some people work in their own way, while others have a different approach. A lot of things need to be learned. As my comrade said, we thank our instructors for training us, especially those guys who came from civilian life.
because they haven't seen war and knew nothing about it. My unit moved to Donetsk region. We took positions near town of Mayorsk. We prepared positions and the enemy launched an offensive. They suffered heavy casualties. According to intercepted communications, there were 14 killed and 23 wounded. Combat continued from 9 AM till 6 PM. Both sides employed armored vehicles, including tanks. Artillery and MLRS were also involved, meaning personnel were under fire from all types of weaponry. However, throughout this combat, we only suffered 2 casualties who were wounded. Through intercepted communications, we learned that after our initial strike, the enemy personnel, who were mobilized troops, started to withdraw.
Bakhmut, Soledar became a tough test for the units of the 3rd National Guard Brigade, but they passed it with dignity. In urban combat, they demonstrated resilience and determination.
On Mayorsk axis, our unit operated different tasks for a month. Our main task was, so to speak, to lower the enemy's morale. We made sure that even in their rear, the enemy did not feel safe. We conducted fire raids on enemy positions, set up ambushes along their routes of movement in this territory, and destroyed their personnel and equipment. At the end of 2022, our battalion tactical group took up defensive positions on the southern outskirts of Bakhmut. Thus, our positions were under constant enemy fire, being targeted by their artillery, tanks, anti-tank weapons, mortars, AGLs, and rocket-propelled grenades. They are using everything they have. The enemy has sufficient ammunition. Still, the overall situation in town is under control. Our unit has been holding these positions for twice as long as other deployed units.
We are constantly countering the enemy's offensive actions on the outskirts of Bakhmut, which is taking a toll on us. But we keep working and giving our best. Every soldier recognizes the necessity of completing this task. We cannot allow the enemy into the city. We must always be prepared, detecting the enemy, as their tactic is based on small groups. It's challenging to keep track of them. Once we fly, we can detect the tank column, but there is nothing like this. Small groups of 4 or 5 individuals infiltrate through houses, constantly on the move, so it's quite difficult to keep track of them. They are aware of our frontline positions and we know their ones. That's why we focus on joint efforts of reconnaissance and artillery. We detect and eliminate them. The more we eliminate, the fewer chances they have to infiltrate the city and inflict damage on our positions. When comparing, it's completely different strategy from what they had since February 24th. Totally different tactics here in Bakhmut, especially when PMC Wagner is involved. You literally see it. There is nothing to be afraid, but we are taking into account different approaches. There are enemy groups that move and maneuver, and there are groups that mostly use defensive style. What they have in common is that they hold ground until they are eliminated. Different groups have different skills level, thus they use different tactics. Convicts and conscripts usually lack tactical understanding, and there are well-trained mercenaries, whom we can identify right away. Currently, they are relying more on manpower rather than equipment. They use sheer numbers, so to speak, to press against our defenses. They attempt to find weak points and penetrate the city. It's quite challenging to resist the enemy when they capture even 2-3 small houses within the city. We need to kick them out, but it's hard. They actively try to move between buildings. In such cases, we need to readjust our artillery, look for them again. And the front line is quite extensive, so we walk 24/7. We have sufficient ammunition and artillery. So far we are managing to fulfill the objectives set by our command. However, they constantly launch assaults, continuously and persistently. They engage all available forces and resources, including artillery, and deploy a large number of personnel, disregarding the human toll.
However, I will say that when we came under the operational command of the National Guard, it felt like being among our own. We shared a comparable skills level with identical weaponry and equipment. And that's it, they conducted a beautiful assault. Before storming the enemy positions, the artillery of the 3rd Brigade shelled it. Followed by the support of their armored vehicles, APCs fired on the enemy's positions. Then it was our infantry's turn, along with our National Guard's reconnaissance groups. We entered, cleared the area, established control, and transitioned to a defensive stance in the designated positions. We have always had mutual trust, and there were no misunderstandings between us, neither loss nor uncoordinated shifting of positions. We constantly communicated with each other, and had the enemy launched an offensive, simply getting in touch with the artillery of the 3rd Brigade would have been enough. They were always ready to support us with fire. Daytime, nighttime, anytime. One of the most memorable moments was recapture of our positions in the northern outskirts of Bakhmut, near a small village. Together with reconnaissance of the 3rd Brigade and border guards, we reclaimed our positions. We were supported by the armored vehicles of the 3rd Brigade with their firepower, and it was a successful operation that resulted in recapture of our positions and inflicted significant losses on the enemy. This operation remains a vivid memory for me. There was also a kind of relay with the 3rd Brigade regarding shooting down aerial targets. If I'm not mistaken, units of the 3rd Brigade shot down 2 enemy helicopters within a week, and we shot down 2 enemy aircraft during that same week. Next night, 3rd Brigade shot down another enemy aircraft, and that's when this relay started. I have nothing but positive impressions. We understood each other brilliantly and provided mutual support. As our rotation neared its end, 3rd Brigade provided us with fire support and reinforcements. They helped us evacuate the wounded and shared ammunition with us. We often heard important words and witnessed important actions from the commander of the 3rd Brigade, and our brotherhood was defined by this. Brigade commander, battalion commanders, sergeants, and soldiers were always ready to help.
Upon returning from Bakhmut, Spartan Brigade units undergo significant restructuring as they have gained new experiences. During the recruiting campaign Offensive Guard, a new wave of highly motivated volunteers has joined, ready to train and liberate our lands from the invaders.
This is Ukrainian-made equipment for 221AR. During the first week, we were preparing weapons for combat. Although this is second-tier weaponry, it's taken alone on missions, so that in case of close contact, we can suppress enemies with fire. Thus, the primary weapon is sniper rifles. Before, I worked as an actor in the film industry and a professional athlete. I am a multiple-time champion of Ukraine and held the national record in powerlifting. I joined the military on February 26. Initially, I joined a volunteer battalion and spent around 6 weeks defending my hometown, Kharkiv. Later, I decided to join the army through mobilization and initially ended up in the rear unit of the National Guard. For a while, I tried to transfer back to the combat unit, then I learned about the formation of the Offensive Guard and realized that it was exactly what I needed. We based our training on the course of study of Omega Special Purpose Units. They undergo training within a separate program by the National Guard. I myself completed this training course, as did my deputy and my chief of staff. We concluded that such training is necessary as it's quite effective, speaking about training special purpose units. This training course was approved by the Commander-in-Chief of NGU. Thus we are currently sharpening our soldiers' experience in accordance with the program of special purpose units. We are now taking a more rigorous approach to the selection process. Our primary focus is on the civilian population who are highly motivated. We are looking for individuals who have a strong desire to defend our country and to fulfill their constitutional duty as citizens of Ukraine by defending the state. Resilience. It can be nurtured, but it takes a lot of time. Every person is born with resilience, however, its sustainable development needs to be set. There are always leaders. In every team there are leaders. They show up in difficult situations. That's why training is crucial. If there is proper training and every commander at their level understands that training is not just for the sake of the check marks in the service journal, but necessary for the military personnel to be able to fulfill their assigned tasks, then it becomes evident that training is vital and you have to train permanently. Physical, professional and combat trainings. These are parts of the single entity. Indeed, many things need to be changed because we are not fully prepared for these events. The National Guard had different tasks. However, now we are Ukrainian Defence Forces. Alongside assault brigades, airborne assault brigades and mechanized brigades fulfill tasks just like our comrades on the left and right. And it doesn't matter who you are, a guardsman, a service member of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, a special force fighter or the State Border Guard serviceman, all of us carry out the same mission, defending our country. Yes, we have a large number of personnel and we care for every serviceman. Because first and foremost, we are focused on the people we work with. This is important to let people feel they are valued. Thus they understand the importance of fulfilling their duty. Therefore, such soldiers engage in more effective training, they strive to acquire new knowledge and skills, they become more attentive to their equipment, they feel that everything has been done for them, and now the final say is in their own hands.
Guardsmen of the 3rd Brigade of Rapid Response have substantial experience in defensive capabilities. Their mission is the proficient cleansing of Ukraine's eastern borders from Russian invaders. They fight steadfastly and valiantly for liberty and sovereignty of our lands, restoring them to their legitimate owner, people of Ukraine.